Donald Trump has just triggered the most dangerous escalation in the Middle East in years. And now he's scrambling as it spirals out of control. This is not a contained strike. This is regional chaos unfolding in real time. Iranian Shahed drones are slamming into residential buildings in Bahrain. Dubai's Palm Jumeirah is under attack. A U.S. naval radar installation has reportedly been destroyed. Ballistic missiles are streaking across the skies of Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iraq. And now the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point for nearly 20% of the world's oil supply, appears to be shutting down. Global markets are staring at a potential economic shockwave, and the President of the United States, missing. Trump was expected to address the nation. That speech vanishes. The White House now claims it was never scheduled, in the middle of a spreading war. That's not leadership, that's panic management. Instead, we get a grotesque late-night video. Trump casually saying American soldiers may die because that often happens in war, telling the Iranian people maybe this is what they wanted. It's a humiliating, incriminating admission of recklessness. Here's the part that makes this disastrous. Iran had reportedly agreed, through Oman, to halt uranium enrichment. Diplomacy was ongoing. Then the bombs fell. And when you see what Trump himself said about starting wars for political gain, this gets even uglier. Now let's talk about the lie. Because Donald Trump is pretending this war was unavoidable, that it was about an imminent nuclear threat, that he had no choice. That's the story they're selling right now. That Iran was racing toward a bomb, that America had to act, that this was strength. But that narrative is already collapsing. Let's look at what was actually happening. Through Omani mediation, Iran had reportedly agreed to halt uranium enrichment. Talks were ongoing. Additional negotiations were scheduled. The foreign minister of Oman was actively facilitating discussions between Iran and the United States. This wasn't theoretical diplomacy. This was live diplomacy. And then the strikes launched in the middle of it. So when Trump now frames this as some heroic last-second move to prevent catastrophe, that's gaslighting. That's rewriting history in real time. Let me remind you what he used to say. Back in 2012 and 2013, Trump repeatedly claimed that President Obama would attack Iran just to look tough before an election. He posted that Obama would start a war with Iran to boost his political standing. He said it outright. He accused others of manufacturing conflict for optics. And now, he launches the largest joint strike in Israeli Air Force history. Over 200 fighter jets, 500 targets, in an operation being branded Operation Epic Fury. You cannot make this up. Even members of his own political orbit are cracking. Marjorie Taylor Greene, not exactly a moderate, publicly blasted Trump and J.D. Vance as liars. When your own extremist flank is calling you out, you know something is breaking. And let's not forget the CIA's prior assessment. Even if the Ayatollah were killed, he would likely be replaced by another hardliner, possibly more extreme, potentially from the Revolutionary Guard. In other words, regime change doesn't magically produce stability. It produces power vacuums. It produces chaos. Yet Trump is still pushing the magical thinking that bombs equal peace. Meanwhile, Senator Mark Warner, after a classified briefing, stated there was no evidence Iran posed an imminent threat to the United States. None. He warned these strikes could mark the beginning of an open-ended regional conflict. So let's recap. Diplomacy was ongoing. There was no confirmed imminent threat. Intelligence warned regime change wouldn't solve the problem, and Trump pulled the trigger anyway. That's not strength. That's recklessness wrapped in bravado. And when we dig into the actual timeline of what happened, the Strait of Hormuz, the civilian casualties, the economic chokehold, it gets even more grotesque. Now let's slow this down and walk through what is actually unfolding, because the details here are damning. I'm looking at the timeline as it is being reported. First, the initial U.S.-Israeli strikes. Israeli Defense Forces confirmed this was the largest aerial operation in their history. Over 200 fighter jets, approximately 500 targets hit. The operation is being branded Operation Epic Fury. Think about that name for a second. Fury. That's not de-escalation language. That's shock and awe branding. Now let's look at the immediate aftermath. Within hours, Iranian retaliation begins spreading across the region. Shahed drones are striking Bahrain. A residential building is hit. A U.S.-controlled radar facility at the major naval base in Bahrain reportedly takes a direct hit. Billion-dollar equipment damaged or destroyed. That's not symbolic. That's strategic. Then we see footage emerging from Dubai. Palm Jumeirah, one of the most recognizable tourist destinations in the world, under drone assault. This is not some isolated military zone. This is commercial, civilian-facing infrastructure. That's escalation. Now I want you to focus on the Strait of Hormuz. Pull up the map in your mind. This narrow waterway handles nearly 20% of the world's oil and gas supply. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, Qatar, they all depend on this corridor. Reports begin circulating that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is warning vessels over radio frequencies that no ships are permitted to pass. If that closure holds, even temporarily, we are looking at a global economic shockwave when markets open. Energy spikes, supply chain strain, inflation pressures return. This is how regional wars become worldwide consequences. And then there's the civilian toll. An elementary girls' school in Minab in southern Iran reportedly struck during the US-Israeli air campaign. The death toll? 85. Mostly children. Let that sit for a second. 85 young girls killed. You can debate military objectives. You can argue geopolitics. But dead children are not strategic messaging. That's grotesque. And here's where it gets even more unstable. Conflicting reports begin circulating about the status of the Ayatollah. Some Israeli sources hint he may have been targeted. Iranian officials insist he's alive. The Iranian foreign minister publicly states that the supreme leader, the president, the judiciary head, the speaker of parliament, all are alive and everything is fine. Now pause. Before the strikes, U.S. intelligence assessments reportedly indicated that even if the Ayatollah were killed, he would likely be replaced by another hardliner, potentially someone even more extreme from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So what exactly is the endgame here? If the objective shifted from uranium enrichment to regime change, and that appears to be the case, then we are talking about a fundamentally different mission. Regime change is not a surgical strike. It is an open-ended destabilization campaign. And we are already seeing the consequences. Iran is retaliating not just against Israel, but against multiple neighboring states: Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iraq. The conflict is widening. Afghanistan and Pakistan are reportedly entering open hostilities in the background of this regional chaos. The dominoes are falling. Meanwhile, Trump posts a late-night video saying American soldiers may die because that often happens in war. That's the level of strategic articulation we're getting. No detailed roadmap, no articulated exit strategy, no coherent explanation of how this produces long-term stability, just bravado. And when he was expected to address the nation directly to explain what is happening, that appearance evaporates. The White House claims it was never scheduled. This is how you know they are scrambling. Because when leadership is confident in its strategy, it steps forward and explains it. It reassures markets. It reassures allies. It clarifies objectives. Instead, what we are watching unfold feels reactive, escalatory, chaotic. Bomb first, explain later. And that kind of magical thinking that you can detonate 500 targets, risk closing a global oil artery, trigger retaliatory strikes across half a dozen nations, potentially kill 85 children, and somehow call that stability, that's not strategy. That's the cabal convincing itself that force equals control. History says otherwise. And this is only the beginning of the blowback. Now step back and look at the pattern, because this is not an isolated miscalculation. This is not a one-off strategic gamble. This is part of a long, disastrous pattern of magical thinking, ego-driven decision-making, and performative toughness that keeps collapsing under its own weight. Donald Trump has always confused chaos with strength. We've seen it before. In business, in politics, in governance. Trump Steaks, Trump Airlines, Trump University, the casinos that went bankrupt. Casinos, the one business mathematically designed to make money, and he still managed to drive them into the ground. That's not bad luck. That's structural incompetence dressed up as bravado. And now that same mentality is being applied to geopolitics. Bluster first, consequences later. Let's talk about cognitive stability for a second. Because while missiles are flying and oil routes are potentially shutting down, Trump is posting rambling late-night videos in a baseball cap, casually musing that American soldiers might die because that often happens in war. He is ranting and raving one day about peace through strength, and the next day escalating into the largest joint air assault in Israeli history. That's not consistency. That's volatility. Meanwhile, polling in recent months has shown fatigue with endless foreign entanglements. The pro-peace ticket branding that Trump and J.D. Vance leaned into during the campaign now looks grotesque in hindsight. Vote for peace. Get regional escalation. And even inside his own coalition, fractures are forming. When figures from the MAGA ecosystem start publicly calling the administration liars, that's not a minor crack. That's structural stress. Now layer in the economic dimension. If the Strait of Hormuz disruption holds, even temporarily, energy prices spike. Markets open in panic. Inflation fears resurface. Working families feel it at the pump and in grocery aisles. This isn't abstract geopolitics. This hits kitchen tables. And that's the irony. Trump sold himself as the protector of the American economy, the dealmaker who could prevent global instability. Instead, we're watching a scenario unfold that intelligence assessments reportedly warned could spiral. Regime change fantasies without a clear succession plan, retaliatory strikes across allied states, potential multi-theater conflict stretching from the Gulf to South Asia. This is how systems destabilize. We are already seeing Afghanistan and Pakistan sliding into open hostility in the background. Regional tensions are amplifying. Once multiple fronts ignite simultaneously, containment becomes exponentially harder. And through all of this, the messaging from the White House is shifting by the hour. First, it's about uranium enrichment. Then, it's about regime change. Then, it's about future safety. The goalposts are moving in real time. That's not strategic clarity. That's narrative improvisation. And here's the bigger picture. Strong leadership reduces volatility. It reassures allies. It deters adversaries without triggering cascading retaliation. What we are witnessing instead is escalation without articulation, power without planning, fury without foresight. This isn't just a foreign policy gamble. It's a stress test of global stability, and it's being driven by the same impulse control that bankrupted casinos. That's not a coincidence. That's a warning sign. This is the difference between strength and recklessness, between truth and propaganda, between leadership and ego. What we are witnessing right now is not some master chess move. It is escalation layered on top of shifting justifications, civilian casualties, economic brinkmanship, and a president who is disappearing when clarity is needed most. Diplomacy was underway. Intelligence warned about the limits of regime change. The region was already fragile, and yet the bombs fell anyway. That's not peace through strength. That's instability through impulse. Democracy cannot function on magical thinking. It cannot survive on gaslighting during a geopolitical crisis. The American people deserve transparency, strategy, and accountability, not late-night ramblings and narrative spin. This moment matters. So if you value independent analysis that cuts through propaganda, hit subscribe. Help us grow this channel. Let's push toward the next milestone together. Support independent media. Share this video. Stay informed. Because the truth still matters, especially when the stakes are this high.